to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, of Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee. In the region of the Decapolis, they brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. Jesus took him aside in private away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be open." And immediately his ears were open. His tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. I keep a calendar up on my wall. I don't use it often. I have a calendar on my phone now, and those electronic calendars are handy. But I do keep the calendar on the wall for those very, very rare occasions when the boss sticks her head in the office and says, "Good job." So far, after 9 months, it's an empty calendar.
Well, it should be.
And yet, we hear this morning that people are looking at Jesus and saying, "He does everything well." Everything. And we get to hear a lot of what Jesus has done, don't we? We've listened over the past weeks about feeding the multitudes and talking about the bread of life. And yet we also hear about the 5,000 men plus the women and children who had followed him. But when he started talking about the true bread of life, that being his body and blood, they all left. And then he was back down to 12. Now this woman we hear is a Gentile, a Syrophoenician. She had come a long way. She had come a long way because her daughter was possessed by a demon. We might say that she was ill. However, there was something very, very wrong with her. Something that mom could not take care of. She could not kiss the boo-boo away. It would not go away. I'm sure she probably consulted with all of the people of the time, whether in the village or those who were healers, and still this girl was in trouble. And she heard about Jesus. So she goes off. She's never seen him before. She has heard about some of the things he's been doing, and so she tracks him down. And she's gone a long, long way to find him. I think many of us would do the same, wouldn't we? If it was our child or our grandchild, if they need any type of attention at all, whether it be medical or otherwise, we would not stop until we found someone that could help them. she was not going to stop until she found someone to help her daughter. And she didn't care what it would take. Now, I need to remind us all again about the hierarchy during the time of Christ. Unfortunately, there were the men, and there were the younger men, then there were the boys, and then there were the women. Now, we are also told that this is a Gentile woman. For her to speak to Jesus, she could have been stoned to death on the spot. You see, we hear that she's a Syrophoenician, but in another gospel lesson we are told she's a Canaanite woman. And the Canaanites and the Israelites, well, that was just like fire and water right there. Or better yet, fire and gunpowder. They hated one another. And so you have this woman who knows very well that she should not be speaking to this man. She knows the consequences could be death. At the very least, she could be punished severely. She does not care, because this is her child. And so she comes to Jesus and she bows down. She bows down because she knows that this is someone special. That this has to be the Son of God, or the Messiah that had been proclaimed. And so she bows down to him, and they begin this discourse. And she asks for the healing of her daughter. A simple request, one that we have probably made ourselves, haven't we? We lift people up in prayer every Sunday, and I know a lot of us each and every day lift up numerous people in prayer. And we say, God, heal. God, restore. God, whatever the needs of these people are, please, Father, give them what they need. We would expect Jesus to say, okay, but he doesn't. He looks at her and says, it's kind of foolish taking bread off the table and throwing it to the dogs. Now we have to understand something else too. That a Gentile woman to a Jew would have been referred to in that day as a witch with a capital B. So the reference of a dog is not one that is, at that time, would have caused anyone to even perk their ears. And yet the translation that Jesus uses is not that translation. The translation of the word that Jesus uses is actually that of a little puppy or a lap dog. Which, if you're in my household, we have two spoiled little lap dogs. And of course, the boss's is more spoiled of all of them. We took her to the vet the other day. She cracked the 5-pound mark after 2 years. So we've got a 5-pound little princess. And then we have my dog, who's about 11 pounds. And they both have to sit on your lap. And they both like to be under your feet when you're eating. But we were told very early on, when we started having dogs a long time ago, by somebody very wise. He said this: when you're at the table, your dog is going to beg. Ignore him. Your dog is going to scratch at your leg. Ignore him. Your dog is going to give you those eyes. Ignore him. Do not feed him anything from your table. Rather, when your meal is over, if there are scraps of protein, put it over on the floor in the dog's dish. Because if you feed them from the table, all you are doing is rewarding them for their barking or their begging or those eyes that they give you, and they will never stop. Well, this woman was begging. She was begging and asking, trusting that yes, in Jesus Christ, all things are possible. And she must have heard somewhere along the way about this bread of life. Because when Jesus talks about bread and feeding the children, her response is simply, the dogs would be content sitting underneath your table, receiving the scraps. That's all I need. I don't need that loaf of bread. All I need is whatever's left over. I just need that very little bit. And I know that that is enough. And Jesus looks at her and says, for saying this, your daughter is healed. You see, those 5,000 men plus the women and children, they couldn't grasp this concept about this bread of life. And yet, this Gentile woman came begging. And when Jesus talked about bread, she opened herself and she said, I will take even the scraps from you, for I trust in you. Those who had followed him, who had seen what he had done, who had been fed by the earthly food, who had witnessed other signs and miracles, they left because he no longer gave them that portion of bread. But this woman trusted. And for that, her daughter was made whole again. It said that after that Jesus traveled along and that he went through the Decapolis, which the Decapolis was a league of cities, and there were 10 of them. And so he traveled through no less than 10 cities, but I'm sure he went through more towns. And along the way he kept doing the same thing, healing and teaching, so much so that his fame had spread, that wherever he went, that fame preceded him. And so people were saying, heal me, touch me, do this. Whatever I need, please give me. And not only were they doing that, but if you heard the reading for this morning, it seems innocent enough, and it seems as if this is just a normal request, a request that we would make of God. There's a man who is deaf and he has a speech impediment. And his friends want to get him cured. What is wrong with that? Well, he kind of falls into the same trap that sometimes we do when we pray. You see, these people did not come up and say, please, Jesus, heal this person. Rather, they say, Jesus, heal this person, and here's how I want you to do it. Place your hands upon him, and that way he'll be made well. You see, we think we know better than God. We think we can tell God, this is the way we want you to do it. We know you can handle it, but you got to do it our way. And Jesus then looks at them and says, let's take a hike. He takes them away into the wilderness area. And when they are alone, he begins to communicate with this man. And I never thought about it before. Every time I read this passage, I kept thinking how disgusting this was. But then when I started reading it over and over and over, it made sense to me. If someone is deaf, if someone has a speech impediment, how would you communicate to them? So Jesus takes his fingers and puts them in his ears. Now, is he healed at that point? No. Jesus is trying to communicate to him what he is about to do. It says that he spits, and then he places his finger on his tongue. In my mind, when I read this over the past, I don't know how many years, I pictured Jesus hogging up a loogie on his finger and then putting it on a guy's tongue. And I'm thinking, how disgusting is that? But I believe what Jesus did was he spit on the ground so this man could see it was coming from the mouth, and then he placed his finger upon his tongue. And again, at that point, was the man healed? And the answer is no. But Jesus was communicating to this man what was going to happen. Now at this point, this man should have understood, and I believe he did. And he had two choices. He could have stayed and believed, or he could have got up and left because this guy's a lunatic. And yet he chose to stay. And so Jesus looks up to heaven, and it says he sighs. And I wonder why. Maybe it's because he's done so much of this stuff, and yet people still don't believe. And yet because the compassion that God has for us, he continues to do his work. And so he looks up to heaven. And then he says the word Ephatha, tongue twister. It means to be open. And that is when the man is healed. You see, Jesus asked God, and God responded by opening this man's ears and his mouth. And he was able to hear, and he was able to speak. And I'm sure that, yes, Jesus told him, please don't tell anybody. But let's face it, if you were born that way, or if you've been that way for years upon years upon years, and you go home, and all of a sudden you're chattering like there's no tomorrow, somebody's going to notice. And of course, along the way, as you're going, you're probably going to tell people, this man Jesus healed me. You know I've been unable to speak, I've been deaf, and this man Jesus healed me. You just wouldn't help it. I mean, let's face it, that is not news you keep tucked away. And that's what happened. And then the people came to say, everything he does well. Well, that's an understatement, isn't it? I mean, it's like, okay, God will give you a gold star. And yet, not everyone came to believe. Yes, Jesus, you've done everything well. Yes, Jesus, you've made the lame walk. Yes, Jesus, just like in Isaiah, it says, you shall make those who are deaf hear again, and you shall make the tongue speak again. You shall open them. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was trying to open the hearts and the minds of the people so that they might understand who he really was and why he really came. And that's what he is doing today for us and continues to do and has done since the beginning of time. Opening our hearts and our minds so that we might hear his word and that we might believe in his word being real in Jesus Christ. That we might believe that we can have that relationship with God once more. That we can come to him with our needs and say, God, into your hands I place these things with no conditions. That's the big thing. God, my loved one is ill. I place them into your hands. Whatever healing or restoration you see, it is up to you. It's not, God, my aunt has got pneumonia. Can you heal her in time so we don't have to miss the Labor Day party? God, our friends need to sell their house because they're moving and they want to be moved by next month. Can you make that happen? God, I want to be able to preach in multiple cities at a time, so can you have my congregation buy me a jet plane? We are able, because of the sacrifice that Christ made on the cross, come to God, asking in prayer for our loved ones, for ourselves, for those who we don't know, for those we may never know. We lift them up, trusting that God will know what is best for them. And even though it may not go according to our plan, it will go according to God's will. We may not see that healing or that restoration here on earth, but I guarantee you this: we will witness that healing and that restoration in God's kingdom. So if our prayers don't seem like they're being answered, just remember this: it may just mean that God has something better in mind, and the time will be right, and it will happen. Trust as this Gentile woman trusted. Trust as this man trusted. Knowing that this is indeed the Son of God, and that salvation and healing and wholeness comes only through him.